Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the fastest, literally most comprehensive political collapses in modern British history. We're going to look at the exact mechanics of how the UK went from Keir Starmer's historic landslide victory in July 2024 to his incredibly dramatic sudden resignation today on June 22, 2026.
So let's just get right into it. How exactly does a massive, seemingly unbreakable 172-seat majority just fall apart in under 2 years? We're going to answer that question today without taking any political sides. We're simply looking at the cold, hard data and the rapid-fire sequence of events that completely rewrote the British political map.
Well, the foundational crack actually appeared on day one. You see, while Starmer secured a massive parliamentary majority in 2024, it was built on just 34% of the popular vote. Political analysts flagged this immediately. Think about that for a second. This was the smallest vote share for a majority government since 1830. To make sense of this unprecedented collapse, we're going to follow the timeline through 6 distinct stages: the fragile 2024 mandate, the compounded crises of economy and prisons, the constitutional scandal, the local election wipeout, Burnham's path to power, and finally, what this all means for future UK stability.
Starting off with Part 1, the fragile 2024 mandate. Political analysts hit the nail on the head when they accurately described this as a loveless landslide, which left the new administration highly vulnerable right out of the gate.
Because that initial winning coalition was incredibly wide but shallow, meaning they won a lot of seats but with razor-thin margins, early unforced errors just hit them disproportionately hard. We're talking controversies over the Prime Minister accepting personal gifts, like designer glasses, mixed with highly unpopular welfare expenditure cuts. At the same time, the administration's strict neutrality regarding conflicts in the Middle East deeply alienated progressive voters. This perfect storm of missteps sent Starmer's net favorability absolutely plummeting to -57 by January 2026.
Moving to Part 2, crises, economic, and prisons. The honeymoon phase was officially over, and the real systemic problems were starting to pile up.
The new government's central promise, economic growth, basically flatlined. Both the UK's budget watchdog, the OBR, and the IMF drastically downgraded growth projections for 2026, and this sluggishness was severely exacerbated by the macroeconomic shocks of global geopolitical instability, which acted like a massive anchor on Britain's highly financialized economy.
By May of 2026, those global shocks hit the Treasury hard. Sluggish domestic growth, combined with hostile reactions from the global bond market, drove monthly public sector net borrowing up to an astonishing £23.3 billion. That vastly exceeded forecasts and essentially trapped the government in a severe fiscal constraint. They literally had no money to maneuver.
And that intense economic squeeze trickled right down to public services, triggering a highly visible carceral crisis. The total prison population swelled to over 87,000, creating a systemic crowding rate of nearly 25%. To stop the penal system from completely collapsing, the government had to pull the emergency brake, releasing inmates after they'd served just 40% of their sentences. Predictably, this was a public relations disaster. It was strongly opposed by 70% of the electorate, and it fundamentally damaged the administration's authority on law and order.
Which brings us to Part 3. The constitutional scandal. Because while the economy and public services were faltering, the ultimate catalyst for the government's collapse was a completely self-inflicted ethical disaster.
The whole thing spiraled incredibly fast. In late 2024, new Labour architect Peter Mandelson was appointed U.S. ambassador. But then, in September 2025, unsealed U.S. Department of Justice files revealed that Mandelson had deep, ongoing financial ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. By February 2026, things hit a boiling point, and Mandelson was formally arrested by the Metropolitan Police on suspicion of misconduct in public office, tied to historical leaks of classified information. But here is what brought the scandal directly to the Prime Minister's doorstep. The UK Security Vetting Agency had explicitly recommended against granting Mandelson security clearance. Yet, Foreign Office officials, acting under intense, high-level political pressure, just overruled that intelligence recommendation to force the appointment through. This revelation completely shattered Starmer's remaining moral authority, prompting formal investigations into ministerial code breaches and causing top staff to just walk out. Okay, on to Part 4, the local election wipeout. Because on May 7, 2026, the political bill finally came due. The modern British electorate just completely fragmented. Labour's projected national vote collapsed to a mere 17%, tying with the Conservatives. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage's populist Reform UK insurgency absolutely surged to an estimated 26 to 27%. And on the left flank, the Green Party capitalized heavily, climbing to 18%. After hemorrhaging nearly 1,500 councillors and losing crucial post-industrial voters entirely, absolute panic set in. Labour MPs realized Starmer was now a massive electoral liability. They began openly demanding his resignation, literally labeling him an obstacle to defeating Farage's populist wave.
This takes us to Part 5, Burnham's path to power. Desperate to neutralize this massive electoral threat in the north, the fractured party looked to the highly popular mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham.
Now, there was a major catch here. Under the British system, a prime minister has to be a sitting member of parliament, and Burnham was a mayor. So, an unprecedented, highly choreographed maneuver unfolded. An incumbent Labour MP essentially stepped aside from the safe northern seat of Makerfield. Burnham secured the candidacy from the party's governing body, and on June 18, he decisively won the by-election, crushing Reform UK with an absolute majority of 54.8%. For the panicked Labour Party, this proved he alone had the political capital to halt the Reform UK momentum. And this shift marks a massive, defining ideological pivot at the top of the British state. Burnham is basically throwing out Starmer's cautious Treasury rules for a definitive shift left, which he's calling the productive state. Instead of centralized, incremental repair, Burnham's platform is going all in on the mass nationalization of failing utilities, aggressive regional devolution to city regions, and heavy public investment aimed directly at fixing the structural inequalities that are driving right-wing populism.
Finally, we arrive at Part 6, Future UK Stability. The dust has settled, but what actually comes next?
With internal rivals like former Health Secretary Wes Streeting stepping aside to avoid a total civil war, Andy Burnham walks into 10 Downing Street as the United Kingdom's 7th Prime Minister in exactly 10 years. 7 PMs in 10 years. That single number just perfectly captures this dizzying era of institutional exhaustion and constant political churn.
So, the reality here is that Burnham is inheriting a total powder keg. He faces a real democratic deficit, governing without his own direct general election mandate. Because of this, Reform UK is already loudly demanding an immediate general election. On the economic front, his ambitious borrowing for regional investment could very easily spook these sensitive bond markets, especially with national debt projected to hit 96% of GDP. And he has to juggle all of this while navigating strange transatlantic relations with Donald Trump and fending off pressure from the Green Party for even more radical restructuring.
So as this incredibly unprecedented chapter of British politics unfolds, we are left with one absolutely critical question. Can Andy Burnham's productive state actually deliver the rapid, tangible economic security that this deeply cynical public is demanding? Or is this massive political gamble just going to trigger yet another catastrophic fracture of the British system? The mandate has changed, but the clock is absolutely still ticking. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.